Welcome to this week's episode of Talking Therapy. Talking Therapy is the companion podcast to my YouTube series In Therapy. We follow brave participants on their real-life therapeutic journeys as part of my mission to break the stigma around mental health, chronic illness. We all go through times in our lives which are challenging. And in this week's episode, we're going to be talking about why building self-love builds self-esteem. Why the relationship you have with yourself is ultimately the most important relationship in your life. This comes from some recent episodes with Katie. It's one of the key themes I've been working on with her. We're also going to be exploring some of the social anxieties that have been coming up for people as lockdown is easing and people come back into the world. I'm also going to answer some of your questions. So please keep the questions coming in. Really, your questions are partly what it does is it helps me get a sense of how things are landing, what's helpful, what's not helpful, what needs clarification. It also becomes the source material for these episodes. So please do keep those questions coming in. So a bit of a recap with Katie. I've been really working with Katie in some of the recent episodes about her relationship with herself, how she talks to herself and speaks to herself with her inner critic, but also the importance of putting in place psychological scaffolding, having the right care, the right support. And Katie came to In Therapy because she's been struggling with depression and anxiety recently. Well, pre our sessions, some things have changed during lockdown, but all 4 children had left home in a short period of time. She'd also been through the breakup of her marriage as well. Here's a recent clip from one of Katie's episodes.
Well, I find if I'm out of a routine, then I find it very difficult to get into a routine, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. But the last week or so, I've got back to work and I've been back in more of a routine. As I say, I don't find it easy to be in any routine, but I've been feeling all right. And I have got an anxiety bubbling under the surface with everything that's going on with COVID. I've heard a couple of really horrible stories, which, but the meditation has really helped. I did the self-love meditation. I've been doing that, and I found that incredibly powerful. I've tried doing the compassion one a few times, and it makes me angry. That's because I try and see people who I still feel angry with through a compassionate lens, and I find that difficult. When I was doing the self-love meditation, I found myself crying my eyes out. Real tears rolling down my face.
I think at the moment, the self-love is more important than the compassion for others. I think so much of your life has been about making other people's needs more important than your own. And there's probably a place in you which feels a bit sensitive and almost reactive to giving others compassion. But actually what it sounds like is really landing and really resonating is giving yourself that self-love and that self-care. So what do I mean when I say self-love builds self-esteem? Well, our relationship with ourself, it really is the most important relationship in our life because all the other relationships we have are influenced and shaped by how we feel towards ourselves, how we're being with ourselves, and how we're treating ourselves. And if we're constantly beating ourselves up and attacking ourselves and criticizing ourselves, or we're not taking care of ourselves, we're not giving ourselves the physical and emotional care and support that we need, really the message we're sending to ourselves is we don't deserve it, we're not worth it, we're not enough. It's almost like we're consistently eroding and sort of scratching away at our self-worth and our self-esteem. When we change our relationship with ourselves, when we start to actively cultivate a relationship of gentleness, of kindness, of being our own best champion, like being the person which has always got our own back, that builds self-love. It builds self-worth because it's saying to ourselves, you matter enough. I love you enough. I care for you enough to be there for you in this way. So how do you achieve that? Now, obviously, that's a much bigger thing than a sort of 3 or 4 minute answer. And indeed, it's something we get into in the Reset program. It's also something that I'm thinking about for a kind of a focused program in of itself at some points in the future. But the first thing, and I always say this, is self-awareness. If you can see it, you don't have to be it. The more awareness you have of how you are currently being with, how you're currently relating to yourself, that awareness allows you to see the things that might need to change, that might need to be different. So, for example, if you have a big achiever pattern, you're always pushing and driving yourself beyond your capacity. When you have a big helper pattern, you're always putting everyone else's needs before your own. By seeing that knowledge, that insight alone empowers you to be able to actively practice doing something different. That awareness is something that grows. Building that awareness is something we've talked about in some other podcasts as well. Journaling is a great way of doing that. The second thing is your inner critic. One of probably the biggest block to self-worth and self-esteem is your inner critic. That constant judging, beating up, criticizing, tearing yourself down. And it's not just in those the kind of big things that happen, those subtle moment-to-moment ways that we judge and we criticize and we attack ourselves. They have an enormous impact on our self-worth and our self-esteem. Another key piece is making space for your feelings and your emotions. If we feel hurt, we feel angry, or we feel scared, and those emotions are not allowed, we don't make space, we don't invite, we don't kind of give time to how we feel. We're really saying to ourselves is we don't matter, that our feelings don't matter. That has, again, a direct impact upon our self-worth and our self-esteem, because what we're doing is like having a small child that is in need of care and support. And we're saying to it, your feelings are not important. You don't matter. Get over it. And after a while, what they learn is their feelings don't matter. And so they learn to bottle up, to squash away. To really build our self-worth and self-esteem, it's sending the message to ourselves that we matter, that our feelings matter, that our heart is precious. And how our heart feels is something that should be invited, something that should be allowed. The day-to-day actions of how we are with ourselves, how we relate to ourselves is so important. Again, it's not just sort of the big awareness, the big understanding. It's what we do moment to moment, day to day, in those interactions, in that relationship with ourselves. Another part of this is how do you maintain that so there's another kind of question that when exterior factors get in the way, like other people, circumstances, events, how do you maintain that relationship with yourself? So sometimes we need to actively carve out space, and that's something that I think that's been an enforced thing for many people during lockdown. But if we've been used to constantly being busy, like perhaps one of the ways that we manage our anxiety and our feelings is by avoidance and distraction, by always doing and being on the go. So we can't feel. Slowing down, making space for, committing to our inner practice, to our inner journey, can be a really important part of then growing and developing and nurturing that relationship. And it's an investment in ourselves. Again, the message is I matter enough to give myself this space, this care, this time. This is this is the curse and this is the gift of chronic illness. Often things in our lives that weren't important, that weren't given priorities, suddenly we lose many things, but we gain something. And what we gain is time. And if we use that time to actively nurture and support and cultivate that relationship, that can be such an important part, not just of the healing journey, but of our life on the other side, looking very different to our life before. So there's some questions related to this topic. I just wanted to give some sort of initial sort of frame and ideas around this. Elena, I think that's the pronunciation, says, how do you stop caring what others think and learn to believe you're enough? So firstly, Elena, you have to work on grounding yourself in yourself and building and connecting to your relationship with yourself. Because otherwise what happens is we're constantly self-referencing via other people. Whenever we're around people, we sort of get sucked into their energy, into their sort of vortex, in a sense. And the more that you work on your kind of just sensing your body, your mindfulness, your meditation practices, the more grounded you are in yourself, the easier it then becomes when you're around other people to not lose yourself, to not then get sucked in to what's going on for everyone else. The next thing is the more you work on your inner critic. One of the reasons why other people's words hurt us so much, one of the reasons why we get so wounded and so triggered by others, is they trigger our own inner critic. It's like our inner critic's already shooting and firing at us, and they give it ammunition. If we stop the guns being there in the first place, there's nothing to load. There's nothing for other people then to use to attack and to criticize us. So it becomes much easier to be around other people in ways that they may be criticizing us, but it's not wounding us, it's not attacking us in the same way. Also, the more you work on building your self-esteem and building your relationship with yourself, it's not that what other people think doesn't matter. I think it's important to be connected to other people, but you're not looking for other people's support to reassure yourself. You know what you think of you, and what you think of you is enough. And there may be key trusted people who you invite their perspectives, but you're not constantly looking to others for that sense of reassurance. Jill asks, could you talk about responsibility? Do some people take responsibility or take on burdens, trying to make things work? And is this a pattern of behavior? And this is something that also can go on when we have low self-esteem and we have a lack of a sense of self-worth. We're constantly trying to earn the love from others. We're constantly trying to prove that we're enough by taking on responsibility for everyone else's stuff. And I think about responsibility being like a continuum. There are people that don't take responsibility for anything. It's always somebody else's fault. They're always blaming and complaining. There are people at the other end where everything is their fault, and they're always blaming themselves and complaining at themselves. I think it's a really important sort of psychological part of our balance to have a healthy sense of responsibility, to not sort of shirk responsibility, but also not to feel that we're responsible for everything, to have an appropriate sense. Being responsible is being response-able, being able to respond. We can't be responsible for things that we're not responsible for, because we can't then be empowered to take action and to do something constructive to ultimately change what is happening. The other thing is that finding balance, sometimes if we've been so used to being overly responsible all of the time, it's like a pendulum that needs to swing a bit too far the other way. And it may be for a while we let go of a lot of responsibility so we can just find that place of balance and that place of space. And then in time, we can come back to perhaps taking on some of those things that we needed to let go. So I'm going to change gear slightly, and I want to talk about some questions that have been coming in around the changes in the coronavirus status. I think when we first got locked down, it was tough. I did quite a few podcasts and live broadcasts under the Everyday Alex stuff about a year ago. The strange thing, though, is that we've normalized to lockdown. And I think that for many people, things opening up, coming back into the world, almost that feels like a challenge. And I wanted just to say a few brief words about that. The first thing is we tend to normalize to however our life is. This is part of our amazing capacity to adapt as human beings. Any of you going through a difficult chronic health situation, for example, at the start would have thought, I could never deal with that. Sometimes months, years go by, and we figure out how to live with and how to adapt to that experience. As lockdown opens, the most important thing is to go gently. Be kind to yourself, be patient with yourself. What you'll find is that things that feel overwhelming, impossible, and just like you can't do it, you go gently and suddenly you look back and you go, oh my God, I hadn't been to the shops in a year. And then I want to go to the shops every day because it's just, you start to normalize to that new way of being. So work on your inner critic, work on your mindfulness. Don't be surprised if some things that you were so used to doing feel a bit difficult and challenging for a while. That's okay. This is, again, it's about your relationship with yourself. Being your own best supporter, your own best advocate, being your own best sort of carer, in a sense, carer of your own heart and your own emotions. Also, work to hold on to what's been good about lockdown. I think for many people, there's been lots of challenges, but there have been gifts in terms of more time, more space. You don't have to let that go. That's something that we can actively work to integrate into and bring into our life on the other side. There was also a question, again from Elena. I have a social phobia, perfectionism, glossophobia, anxiety, phobia of vomit, depression from time to time, and now my skin has reactions that are happening, which I feel is a symptom of stress and always trying. What can I do to alleviate some of these? It's great you see that connection and that relationship. Work on seeing how these patterns play out. And if you're having skin reactions like that, there's probably some unconscious elements going on as well. Working with a practitioner to get some support with that, I think would be really helpful. Just working on calming your whole nervous system, that alone is going to have a big impact. When the whole system is ramped up, we tend to react to and become irritated by things that otherwise wouldn't have that effect upon us. Work to calm your system, work to see the patterns, and then get some support working with some of the perhaps deeper issues that are going on there as well. Hope that's been helpful. Just a couple of things to let you know about. We released on Sunday a video celebrating the 50th episode of In Therapy. Check it out. I think it's a great short video. It just captures really the heart and the essence of what we're doing here. Also, the Fatigue Super Conference starts on Monday. Over 40 of the world's leading experts on fatigue. It's free. Please do register at fatiguesuperconference.com. As always, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Be kind to yourself. Go gently.